Well, if you are a Yuta fan, the past couple of weeks for you probably have been some of the best, no doubt in my mind. We have had probably some of the best Yuta-orientated chapters within the manga, which has given us so much information and insight for his character, especially his abilities. Seeing Rika again, which is really nice. Seeing him fight, hand-to-hand combat, copy abilities, and even bring out a domain expansion. I don't think anyone was really expecting all of this to come out so quickly and so recently, but here we are. On top of all of this lovely, great stuff, we have the Volume 0 movie, which is quite literally a Yuta backstory movie. Beautiful animation, beautiful soundtrack, beautiful everything from start to finish, and honestly just a great watch, a great experience. So to say that Yuta fans are eating incredibly well is probably an understatement. Everyone has been overfed in that department, but of course we're all very thankful. So I thought I'd go through and talk about his character a little bit. A nice simple video giving my perspective on his worth, his role, his value to the story, and potentially where he could go from here. I think he's a very interesting character, and I think Okkotsu has a whole lot of fun writing and drawing him specifically because he's very versatile in this department, and especially with how much power that he actually has, it seems like a whole lot of fun is being had with him. Personally, I think there's a pretty good reason for this in that I find him to feel very familiar. You may think this too, or you may be completely lost on what I mean by that. For me, Yuta is the perfect problem fixer or even replacement for Gojo. Now, before you completely obliterate me in the comment section, hear me out. This isn't to disrespect Gojo or to replace him in its entirety, but more so to fix the problem that Gojo was. See, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that Okkotsu really doesn't like Gojo as a character. Now, for whatever personal reasons, I'm not entirely sure, but on paper, Gojo is a very difficult individual to work with, writing-wise, because of how powerful he truly is. Progressing your main cast of characters, antagonists, villains, the story itself is somewhat gated by Gojo specifically, and it's because he is quite literally the pinnacle of power. He's a pillar that cements throughout the entirety of the story. Pretty much everything, all the power within the story rotates around him. And this subconsciously for readers sets a level of expectation, and if it's not met, sometimes it can be pretty disappointing. This also takes away a level of concern or a level of nervousness that the story would naturally provide within very compelling or dangerous situations, right? Going into Shibuya, if Gojo was not sealed, you would view the entirety of Shibuya differently. The stakes wouldn't be as drastic because you know at some point Gojo would most likely rock up and deal with the situation. That's why sealing him away is such a compelling situation, but also very interesting because it changes the whole dynamic of the story. No longer can we rely on Gojo, and no longer can we feel comfortable with him coming to the rescue. So with Gojo out of the picture, a very important pillar of power, other people have to close that gap. They're not going to become more powerful than Gojo, but the drastic difference between them and him has to be crept up on. And that's exactly what I said was going to happen many months before the Culling Games even started. And that's not some future seeing type of thing. Naturally, these characters would have to progress very quickly to keep up with everyone else that is progressing quickly. Villains, antagonists, curses, etc. Now that Gojo does not stop any of this, people can develop very rapidly. The first person was Maki. She changed very quickly and had a phenomenal arc. Honestly, one of my favorite moments within this story is that section for her. I think it's beautifully handled and something completely different for Kaisen. And honestly, just a great way to showcase how the story is changing in its tone, in its approach to things, which bleeds perfectly into the Culling Games and watching people grow and struggle and change within it. Yuji specifically, Megami, Yuta, Hakari, and Panda most likely as well. So far, every fight or encounter has been a very nice step towards progression or growth in some department, whether it be mentally, emotionally, or physically in regards to power. Where Yuta comes in and why I see him as being very familiar or important is that he's kind of Gojo 2.0. Not only does the story point this out, with him being a descendant of the same person as Gojo and a relative to Gojo, but also power-wise. On paper, he's kind of considered the next person in line power-wise after Gojo. So the role he plays is going to be very similar to Gojo, and that's exactly what it has been. However, it is more flexible. It is a lot easier to manage. not only for most likely Akutami as an author, but also for readers. It's very digestible, it's very palatable. See, when you go into a fight with Yuta, you know he's going to win, which is fine, but you don't know to the extent of how he's going to win. For Gojo, he would most likely just obliterate people in seconds if he really wanted to. For Yuta, it takes a little bit more than that, and you see him get thrown around quite a bit with pretty powerful individuals. But these powerful people don't seem like anything in comparison when you put them up to Gojo. So do you see how the playing field has dropped down in total, but has also raised itself in total? Almost like everyone is starting to align themselves power-wise. There's not a massively drastic difference between everyone now. They're all relatively somewhat close to one another, with the standouts being Yuta and Hikari leading the charge. And Yuta being that standout or that pinnacle is quite literally the new role that Gojo once was, just not as significant and more manageable. So you can feel comfortable, but now you still feel somewhat concerned. You don't know how these events could actually transpire, or what bigger, badder villains or antagonists or threats could come out from this situation that could potentially rival Yuta. And if this person can rival Yuta, they can rival everyone else. This, for me, is a great development, and why I love Yuta being introduced at this point in time, why we're learning and growing with his character currently with all of his abilities. He doesn't have much catching up to do, especially if you've read Volume 0. That provides a lot of context for his character, where he comes from, his emotions, how he feels about things. It gives you just enough to work off. So while you don't have to read Volume 0, it's definitely beneficial and worth your time, which I'd highly recommend you do. Or watch the movie, because that's also an opportunity. I think the craziest thing about all of this is that we can take Yuta to the final fight, because he scales much higher than what we're already seeing. I'm sure there's a lot more tricks and tools within his disposal that he has hidden away, but also the intensity or the prowess of his fighting would most likely change. We haven't really seen him quote unquote get serious or get desperate or really fall into any emotional part of things that would drive his fighting prowess forward very drastically. What do I mean by that? Imagine Gojo when he versed Toji and how he was very loopy and chaotic and all out of control because he was just high on this idea of fighting. Now imagine that for Yuta, when a character goes up against him and actually threatens his life or his friends. Realistically, because we're only still learning about his abilities now and what they're capable of, this is still some sort of the opening fights for the Culling Games. We still have a lot of things to go through, and I still personally think that the Culling Games is going to shift rather drastically in power very soon, with the ulterior motives that Kenjaku has and also potentially Sukuna. But see, I guess the best way to kind of scale it completely, especially with Yuta here now, is that characters that scale even higher than Yuta, potentially Kenjaku when he transcends for example, are still somewhat in reach. You don't expect every character to get washed in its entirety because Yuta is also there, because all of these other characters are also growing very rapidly to meet those standards. Now obviously that's completely hypothetical. We don't know what's going to happen to Kenjaku when he transcends or what he turns into or how powerful he becomes, but I would imagine that he does become extremely powerful, or at least broken in some sort of department. You also have Sukuna, very powerful. You also have Maharaga, also very powerful, and then potentially other evolutions of curses or sorcerers alike within the Culling Games that are going to become very powerful very quickly. Maybe in the sense of themselves or the rules or the evolution of sorcery in itself and them adapting to it, we're not entirely sure, but we're seeing some very incredible people come out to play with some very unique abilities. Sky warping, some massive laser beam output of cursed energy. You have Angel there as well. You can see it scaling, right? We are in a very great position currently, and Yuta's providing a very simple but familiar role that is currently becoming more flexible, more manageable, and for us as readers, more palatable. Don't get me wrong, I feel like we would all love to see Gojo come back, but we need to save the power that he has, the intensity that he will bring for the final fights, for the final hitters, for the biggest of the biggest. There's not much growth that Gojo has to do, maybe mentally, maybe emotionally, but power-wise, he's already at the top. So let's bring everyone else up to speed as much as we can, give them all of these phenomenal fights, while still keeping a portion of what made Gojo kind of direct the whole conversation. Let's put that within Yuta, and that's exactly what's been happening. It's really great to see him get this importance, this shine, this role, and how he's very comfortable within himself to fight all of these individuals. It's not a 1v1 situation, it's a 1v2 situation. It was almost a 1v3 situation. I think where we are currently, other fight that we would have to see would be Hikari and Panda, and not much attention would have to go into that, maybe a chapter or two, before we started to evolve things further and to push on into the next phase of the Culling Games, so to speak. Realistically, I think a lot of things are going to change power-wise, rule-wise, orientation-wise even, and I wouldn't be surprised if the whole story kind of flips on itself again within the Culling Games. It's going to be very exciting with what comes next for these fights, for these characters, for these encounters. Yuta seems very adamant in taking on Kenjaku, so there may be a situation where he tries to. Maybe it's before he transcends, maybe it's midway through his transcendence. There is always going to be a lot more for Yuta. He has a level that we have not seen yet, and we won't see it until it is necessary. This is past his domain and past Rika. This is a limit that is extremely high. Fighting to live, or fighting to save his friends, or fighting to kill another individual is a very different prowess, a very different intensity. So far we have not seen it. We haven't seen it for a lot of characters, but for Yuta's sake, he's going to be the scariest, and a lot of that killing intent or prowess is going into Kenjaku. Undoubtedly, I'm very curious to see where the story goes, not only with the Culling Games, but with Yuta as well. It seems like he's having a lot of fun writing him as a character, as an individual, and just the amount of flexibility and play that he has must be very relieving. And for us as fans, we get to constantly indulge in the character known as Yuta Okkotsu. Endtime. So with that, welcome to the end of the video. If you have made it this far, thank you. I appreciate you. Let me know how you feel about Yuta. Have you seen Volume 0 as of yet? Have you read some of the newest chapters? Are you absolutely excited that we're finally getting some massive things for this beloved character? Do you think he's going to be top 3 in the next popularity poll, whenever that is? Actually, also, let me know where you think his character is going to go. Do you think he's going to fight Kenjaku? Maybe something even more powerful than what he's facing now? Let me know in the comment section below. But with that, I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.